Stephen Breyer making his announcement. I just want to get a rating from you on the narcissism scale where this guy is. Here is Justice Stephen Breyer, announcing his retirement. See if you can see like an image of his book in the background.
We are now engaged in a great civil war to determine whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. See, those are the words I want to see. An experiment. And that's what he thought. It's an experiment. And I found some letters that George Washington wrote where he said the same thing. It's an experiment.
Who cares?
That experiment existed then because even the liberals in Europe, they're looking over here and they're saying it's a great idea in principle, but it'll never work. But we'll show them it does. That's what Washington thought. And that's what Lincoln thought. And that's what people still think today. And I say, well, I want you, and I'm talking to the students now. I say, I want you to pick just this up. It's an experiment that's still going on. And I'll tell you something. You know who will see whether that experiment works? It's you, my friend. It's you, Mr. High School student. It's you, Mr. College student. It's you, Mr. Law School students. It's us, but it's you. It's that next generation and the one after that. My grandchildren and their children. They'll determine whether the experiment still works. And of course, I am an optimist, and I'm pretty sure it will. Does it surprise you that that's the thought that comes into my mind today? I don't know, but thank you.
Now, we should say two things strike me there. He started that yesterday. He's still talking. Also, apparently, the future going to be all male again.
Yeah.
Mr. High School student, Mr. College. But this guy, my God, he waited till his book came out.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. I mean, it's great. It's great publicity, right?
Oh, yeah. Is there any fundamental difference between that kind of person who fetishizes like the founding fathers and the American way of governance to that degree, and his own place in it for that matter, and like an adult who's just really obsessed with like Harry Potter or something like that? I mean, the commitment to the fanciful notions of our republic, it's childlike to me. And yet, and of course, like him being a part of it is helpful in that regard. And when we're talking about his narcissism,
I mean, a lot of with this is the background to a lot of debates we have over the last several years, especially escalating since Trump, is that sort of older liberals attachment to elementary school civics version of American life. Which I as a person who grew up and who became an adult in the post 9/11 era, I've never been able to relate to it at all. And I can't imagine. I have to imagine it just sounds like a foreign language to people younger than me. So I don't know. I mean, Breyer is exceptional in his attachment to it, and that he's like one of the most preening, self-regarding versions of it imaginable. But it's definitely something that has a strong hold over all the people in his generation who refuse to let go of power.
And the amazing thing, we have two types of those, two categories of those two types of people you're talking about. Like, the idea that at least, he's sort of recognizing, or there are people who could have this sort of, well, I don't know, his vision of this experiment and that type of language and that type of belief, there's some people who are, who would argue like it is under grave threat right now. And I am sort of, depending on what day it is, I can at the very least understand that. And I think there's an argument, because I don't know. I've never lived through the demise of, and I think to the extent that we have a democracy, it is highly problematic and flawed insofar as how well it functions. But in terms of that Canadian professor who was around saying that, in 10 years, America is probably going to be an autocracy of some form. It doesn't sound crazy to me,
Right.
because I've never lived through this process before, and I don't know what it would look like. But I can't imagine it would look dramatically different than this. It's just who knows, sometimes you just don't know how deep a pond is until you start to walk in it. And
that's exactly right. And the fact is, so there's, I think, two things here. And one of them is that when you talk about America as an experiment, okay, so when can we make a determination that we want to change the parameters of the experiment? We can't. Like, can we add seats to the Supreme Court? Can we get rid of the Senate? If we say these aspects of the experiment aren't working out, well, it turns out the people in charge aren't going to let us change them. Exactly. And then the other part of it is, in the already existing system, Wisconsin is not a democracy. We have a federalist system. People are already living under undemocratic governments all across the country. So again, like, how's the experiment going? Who gets to decide when the experiment is done? Who actually gets to judge it besides Justice Breyer's children?
And he's gotten to decide a lot about what the makeup of the American experiment has been over the many decades that he's been a judge and that he's been on the Supreme Court. And there is this quality to justices and many judges as well of being so sequestered from the actual realities of everyday people that, one, the nature of having a lifetime appointment allows for that, but also, two, their perception of themselves is above the fray in that area, and academics who can see these things from their lofty ivory towers in their robes. I mean, that is part of the issue as well. And I mean, it could be solved by ending lifetime appointments and then also adding and ending judicial review in many ways.
And I know you grew up, raised by lawyers. I was too. And one of the things that I have found to be sort of just impossible to absorb with this generation of lawyers in particular, is their sort of belief. I mean, Breyer is talking as if this experiment is just we put these things out there into this laboratory and then we stand back and we just observe, as if he's not actually involved in the experiment. Like, this is not an experiment where it's like, I'm going to pour these two things in there and stand back and see what happens. Like, there are 9 people in this country who have the ability to fundamentally change the relationship between our government and citizens. And they do it more or less to some degree every day. And he is sitting next to a couple of them, 6 of them, maybe you could argue 5, depending on any given day, who are just completely ignoring every sort of fantasy that he has or maintains or pretends exists in the law. This idea of that the law is above the fray and that you can be, it's religious. It's totally a religion.
Yeah, I was totally triggered by the way he spoke. Like, yes,
and it's totally we're part of this priesthood, and it's an avocation, and the law exists distinct from human influence. And it's like, dude, look across the people next to you and tell me that's the truth. I mean, it's just absurd. And it's almost like he held on to this fiction so that he could sell his fucking book. And we are still in a tremendous amount of jeopardy. Now, I should be clear here. If the Senate were to confirm somebody tomorrow, even though Breyer's not stepping down, once that person is confirmed, this is my understanding, they are confirmed. So even if they confirm tomorrow, they won't, obviously, and I don't know, Patrick Leahy passes on because he's old, or somebody gets hit by a bus in the Democratic, whatever it is, and is appointed by a Republican, their successor is appointed by a Republican governor, or their successor is not named, which is also a possibility, right? Because how do you pass in a 50-50 Senate if you only have 49 senators? So there's a lot of jeopardy involved here, that this guy just was like, but I think it's going to work out.
It's the grand experiment.
I think it's going to work out.
Yeah, he timed it. It's really close to the last possible minute that he could have done this with the understanding that the majority could very well be lost by the end of the year. And I mean, I don't know. I guess it's very hard to let go of these myths once you allow them to become sort of foundation of your entire worldview. But at the end of the day, he's retiring while Democrats can replace him. And I don't even know how we're supposed to like square that with what he's telling us, right? How does he square it to himself?
Yes. Yeah. Well, and we should be more explicit because he was adamant 6 to 9 months ago that you would not retire for political
There'd be no political considerations in his retirement. So
it really is.
He should have at least pretended to have gotten sick or something, right? Just to just to try to make it a little clearer. Coughing a little blood coming out of his mouth.
And that's part of the narcissism. I mean, not to hang on this too much, but the perception that one is above politics in the saintly position that one resides in when you are in politics, you are in it. And the fiction that they hold on to, one of the many that drives me nuts, is that there is a way for these Supreme Court justices to look upon politics beneath them and then make these godlike decisions that affect everybody else because they have the ability to see what the measly-minded or meager-minded politicians who are elected by the plebeians that they cannot see, and I find that to be triggering, as you say, as I said before. I hate it.
We should say just to be fair to lawyers that there's some of this still resides in the Senate, and I think it's almost gone from the media. But, you and I remember David Broder and that this sort of supposed mentality. But the fact of the matter is that depending on where you're situated, even if you genuinely believe this stuff, if you look around what's happening in this country, you are aiding and abetting that which you say your inaction or your being above the fray is actually part of the fray. There's no escaping it.
And what the Supreme Court and the Senate have in common as institutions is that, I think realists point to the results of their actions, and then the people in the institution say, like, don't do that. You are hurting the legitimacy of our institution in the eyes of the people. Don't stop. You are making us look illegitimate by pointing to the outcomes that our institutions create.